active outreach, not just saying as a corporation, we're supportive of you as an LGBTQ person, but as an LGBTQ consumer.
Andrew Eisen is founder and president of Windmark Concepts. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me on.
And there's news that famed investor Warren Buffett is stepping off the board of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Buffett, who is 90, says he's been quitting all of his board associations except for his own companies. After the Gates announced their planned divorce, there's been speculation about how this might affect their philanthropy, which has been focused on global public health, gender equality, and U.S. education. I'm David Brancaccio, Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Law Firm.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One texter call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
Learn more at waynehogan.law.
Baptist Health wants to make sure you're staying healthy by getting regular colon cancer screenings starting at age 45. Appointments are available by calling 202-4U or visit baptistjacks.com/colon cancer screening for more information.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
It's What's Happening. Hi, I'm Melissa Ross. And just ahead, hear from some of the biggest newsmakers in the community on First Coast Connect, where we discuss the issues and stories that affect your life all across the First Coast. We also ask for your phone calls, emails, and tweets. Engagement is what drives this show, so engage with us right now as we get started here in just a few minutes on First Coast Connect. After the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Congressional Democrats say they'll push on with voting legislation, although their key voting rights bill was stalled in the Senate yesterday by Republicans. The bill failed to win 60 votes needed to pass a filibuster. Some Democrats say the only way to pass their priorities is to get rid of the filibuster, but NPR's Asma Khalid says that probably won't happen.
They'll need to get all of their fellow Democrats on board to do this. That just seems extremely unlikely, and I think there is a real assessment that that's not necessarily possible. But many activists are frustrated with the status quo. It's not just progressives. As the White House engages in bipartisan infrastructure talks, even some of the more centrist voices in the party are starting to question what can actually be done across party lines.
NPR's Asma Khalid reporting. White House officials have met a bipartisan group of senators about their more than $1 trillion infrastructure plan. The White House says there's been progress. They'll meet again today. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is clarifying a report that she is ready to set up a special House committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. NPR's Giles Snyder has more.
Speaker Pelosi's office issued the clarification after word got around that she told members of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee that she's moving forward with a special panel to investigate the mob violence. Pelosi's deputy chief of staff later said on Twitter that a final decision has not been made, that Pelosi is planning to announce a decision this week, and that her preference continues to be a bipartisan independent commission. The House passed a bill last month to create such a commission, but it's been blocked by Senate Republicans. Pelosi's office did not say exactly when her decision will be made public. Several House committees are already investigating the attack. Giles Snyder, NPR News.
The federal government is going to review its Native American boarding school policy. This removed hundreds of thousands of Native American children from their homes. From member station WXXI, Noelle Evans reports Interior Secretary Deb Haaland says her agency will lead the review.
For about a century, Indian boarding schools were designed to assimilate indigenous children to white society through brutality and family separation. Haaland's grandparents were among those sent to the schools. She's moving forward with the initiative as the remains of 215 children were recently found at a boarding school site in Canada.
Each of those children is a missing family member, a person who is not able to live out their purpose because forced assimilation policies ended their lives too soon.
Haaland says part of the U.S. investigation will involve locating mass graves. The probe will be among the first federal efforts to acknowledge the impact of Indian boarding schools since they opened in the 1800s. For NPR News, I'm Noelle Evans.
This is NPR.
And your time now, 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Michelle Corum. Jacksonville City Council members are meeting with state regulators to figure out how to make retention ponds safer in Duval County after the drowning deaths of 2 young autistic children this year. Most of Jacksonville's retention ponds are privately owned and managed. The city's trying to determine just how many of them are not fenced off. WJCT News partner News4Jax reports the inventory began earlier this month after the drowning death of a 4-year-old boy. Jacksonville City Council member Jacoby Pittman says regulators have told her that barriers save lives.
They talked about making the barriers more of a marsh, so if someone goes in or try to fish, it would be easier for them to get out rather than, being drowned. The only thing is the maintenance. You got to make sure that the development, the homeowners association is willing to take that cost on.
Pittman and Councilwoman Leanna Cumber began raising the alarm about retention pond dangers last August. The Sons of Confederate Veterans group is suing to get a 30-foot-high obelisk returned to a site in front of a Georgia courthouse. The monument was taken down last year after a judge in the small Atlanta metro area town of Decatur ruled that it had become a threat to public safety. Decatur's city attorney is calling the lawsuit a lost cause. 76 degrees in Jacksonville. Is very overcast. Upper 80s this afternoon.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Morgan Stanley with the podcast Now What's Next. Sonari Glinton talks with teachers, architects, healthcare workers, trying to make sense of life during and after the pandemic, where podcasts are available.
This is First Coast Connect. Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, sitting in for Melissa Ross, who is taking a much-deserved break. Thanks for listening. Today, the latest on a Four Seasons hotel on the Jacksonville waterfront. The proposal could be gaining traction this week following a favorable report from the Downtown Investment Authority. That agency says a plan by the Jacksonville Jaguars and team owner Shad Khan to build a 5-star riverfront hotel with city incentives is financially sustainable. But later, a look at what's good this Wednesday. First this hour, Times Union reporter David Bauerlein is a veteran city journalist and has been covering city council and downtown redevelopment issues for years. He's been looking at the DIA's initial response to the proposed incentives package. That assessment very different from reaction to an earlier proposal by Khan and the Jaguars for redeveloping Lot J. David Bauerlein is on the line now to explain what is different this time and why. Good morning, David. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Good morning, Ann. How are you?
Good. David's also available to answer your questions, so call 549-2937 and let us know your thoughts. David, you've been looking at this report from the DIA. Does this project initially look like it's got a better chance of success than we saw with Lot J?
I think it does, based on the comments we've heard so far from city council members in general to the proposal, and also I would think that when they're looking at this report, some of the concerns that were raised about Lot J, which was the plan to turn a parking lot near the football stadium into an entertainment district with apartment buildings and hotel, that actually had a lot of concerns about whether the city's amount of incentives and investments were generating enough for the city in return. So this particular report for the proposal on the riverfront with the Four Seasons Hotel, five-star hotel, along with an office building and some really luxurious condominiums, is on that score shows that the city would basically get as much revenue back generated by the activity from the hotel as it would put up in order to make the development possible.
So explain a little bit about what that is when you talk about a return on investment. How do they calculate that? And what are they specifically saying we would see in this case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, they're looking at this a really narrow area of what is the city spending, what's coming out of the city's coffers, and then as a result of the development, what is the city gaining in terms of property taxes, sales tax revenue, in the case of a hotel, hotel bed tax revenue. And then they look at some other things, like in the case of Shad Khan and the Jaguars are saying that they would provide funding over 20 years to support enhancements for Met Park, which is a city-owned park. So, okay, that's the benefits you would get from the development. So they basically have one column of all the costs, the other column of all the financial return, so to speak, the benefits that the city would get out of it financially, and then they look and see is one column bigger than the other. And in the case of the Lot J, for every dollar that the city would have put into that project, they would have gotten back 40 cents in terms of a downtown investment authority analysis. And the city council auditor put it at 44 cents, but it was not a dollar for dollar proposition, which is what they have found in terms of this, the Four Seasons Hotel would provide to the city.
And is there like a standard return on investment when cities give incentives like this, or a guide of any kind that suggests, what would be an acceptable ROI for a project? I mean, dollar for dollar seems like even Steven. Are some cities or some projects expected to generate more than the outlay?
Yeah, I think the general rule of thumb is a dollar for dollar. But, quite frankly, there have been projects that have gone through that did not achieve that standard, even recent projects. Last night, City Council approved, for instance, an economic development incentive package to get Dun & Bradstreet to move its headquarters from New Jersey to Jacksonville. It's a very incentive-heavy project agreement, and the city's analysis there was for each dollar that the city puts in, it gets back 49 cents in revenue that would come from, taxes and that are generated by the company actually having its headquarters here. So they still approved it unanimously. And basically the argument was, well, Dun & Bradstreet, it's so well known that really has some benefits that are above and beyond the bottom line of the city. So it can vary, and it varies by deal. There's some projects in downtown for these historic buildings that are in awful condition. It'll cost a lot of money to make them viable again, and they're not going to get a dollar for dollar return for the city. But the question is it still worthwhile, because there's benefits that go beyond just that formula of how much money do we put in, how much do we get out. But it's a good guide to understand what the value is to the taxpayers of putting an investment up.
The Dun & Bradstreet is interesting, in some ways comparable, because it's got a little bit of a prestige, right, with sort of like the Four Seasons, that there's a value to having that brand in your city. Regardless, but on that question, I actually want to go to Mark in St. Augustine. David, he's got a question for you here. Good morning, Mark. How are you doing?
Hey, Ann, very well. I'm kind of curious how they came to the realization, or Shad Khan came to the realization, that we need a five-star hotel on the riverbank. If I remember correctly, 10 or 15 years ago, Adams Mark and the Omni were also considered luxury hotels, and also, I think, applied for and got city incentives, and Adams Mark changed hands 4 or 5 years down the road, and I understand the Omni Hotel is having trouble too. So it seems like we've got too many rooms for a little small area of town that doesn't really need a luxury hotel. Is this just? I guess this is just a Shad Khan vanity project.
Good question, Mark. David, I believe we've both been around long enough to remember the Adams Mark Hotel incentives package, which at the time I think was the largest in city history. Maybe my memory is a little bit off on that, but tell us a little bit about how the city and Shad Khan determined the need for a luxury waterfront hotel.
Well, I think part of it was just a belief by Shad Khan that it's an aspirational project, and it was kind of, if you're going to build one, go for the best. I think that would be the way he has described it. And a belief that by bringing it here, it does have some beneficial impacts to the city in terms of its reputation, in terms of the word of mouth, so to speak. It raises the game of the city by having an Adams Mark, if it actually does end up Four Seasons, if it does end up being a Four Seasons. So with the riverfront location, people just like being close to the water. I mean, that's the big attraction for people. You often find resort hotels are next to water, either the ocean or a river. Certainly, we brag a lot about the St. Johns River, so it would showcase the river to out-of-town visitors. The bet would be that people who have that kind of income to be able to afford those kind of room rates, which are on the high side, would choose to come to Jacksonville for their leisure travel and stay in a hotel of that caliber and of that cost. He clearly believes that's possible, that it's doable, that there's a market for that. It would be competing somewhat with other hotels, but I think the idea would be that the Four Seasons is just a different beast in terms of the level of hospitality that's offered there, that it wouldn't be as a direct competitor with some of the other hotels in the city.
David, we've got a call from Scott Stanley. He's on hold here. Let me bring him in. Good morning, Scott. How are you doing?
Good morning to everybody. Great show. My concern, we want infrastructure and to improve downtown, but why do it always be from the top down in this city here? And then you want to put a hotel that one of the most expensive hotels in the world in Jacksonville, Florida, when you have a crime that's off the chain for the last 20 years? That's my question.
Good question, Scott. David, how does the city look at spending priorities when it comes to an incentives package like this versus, needs that the city has in terms of infrastructure or fighting crime?
Yeah, well, that's a great question from the caller. I mean, obviously, it is a question of priorities. And you do have violent crime is somewhat down from last year, which is good, but last year was way up in terms of how the city has done over the past year or so. Do you look at things like the high-level neighborhoods that have high levels of poverty? How do you balance that against something that's basically tied into downtown development, which has been a big priority from administration to administration for many years in Jacksonville? That's obviously the question that residents and council members will have to decide if they were to say, part of the rejection of Lot J was that's a lot of money to be spending on that project. We have other needs. Let's focus on those other needs. It's not as high a priority to have what was planned there for Lot J. Now, I will say one thing that's changed since Lot J is the city did approve an increase in the local gas tax that is going to fuel ability to do projects throughout the city, not just downtown. I think they've talked about $100 million for septic tank phase-outs. It's really focused on specific neighborhoods. There'll be $100 million they've talked about for parks across the city, so that's something that would benefit quality of life throughout Jacksonville. And then there's also going to be, I've heard the figure, $70 million. It could be more that would go towards some of the downtown projects, and this is money that's freed up because the gas tax would pay for roads and other projects that otherwise would use general fund dollars. So it's always a big balancing. If you're in a neighborhood where you're suffering high crime, high levels of poverty, you haven't really seen your city develop and get economic activity, and then the city is spending a large amount of money on a five-star hotel, then you might very well think the priorities are misplaced. If the case can be made that by doing this investment in downtown, it has a ripple effect for the entire city, then maybe it's more palatable to people. But yeah, that's definitely a question that would come up from council members that I'm sure they'll hear from residents and their constituents.
Yeah, we actually have Eric on the line from Arlington. He's got a question, I think, just about how much money the city actually has on hand. Good morning, Eric. How are you doing?
Yeah, a point and a question. It seems like the money, what Shad Khan is trying to do is admirable. I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't want to see downtown become more like some of these other cities that have gussied up their downtowns and featured, some of the old architecture and old neighborhoods. I think that's great, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And I admire Shad Khan for trying to do that, if that's what his goal is. But on the other hand, it seems as if the money has left Jacksonville. I mean, with white flight, money has gone south, west, north, anywhere but Duval, it seems. And my question is, so it seems like we're sort of tilting in windmills here. And my question is, is the city broke or not? I mean, whenever it comes to environmental issues, drainage, septic tanks, et cetera, high crime, what have you, neighborhoods that are in distress, we're broke. But then when it comes to lavishing money on the Jaguars, we spend like drunken sailors. So that's one question. And the other question, as an aside, has anyone ever gone back and added up all the money that we've spent on this football team, all the way back from 1990, whatever, when we redid the Gator Bowl the first time? I bet it's quite a bit of money when adjusted for inflation. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet. Thanks, Eric. So a lot of points there, David. And I think you're saying that this gas tax might diffuse some arguments or some pushback against this kind of expense because those infrastructure needs are perhaps finally being addressed. But what about the question of, why the city has money in some cases and has there ever been any calculation done of the overall cost of the Jaguars?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. That would be a fascinating project to take a look at how much has been spent year after year in terms of building the stadium, maintaining the stadium, improving it, subsidizing any kind of operations there. But I don't know. That would be a really interesting question. And certainly we're, in a few years, probably going to be spending a lot of money to renovate, overhaul that stadium at the tune of several $100 million. And the other question in terms of, is the city broke? The city is not broke. The city is in financially healthy condition. It's a growing tax base. There's huge amounts of construction going on that are generating additional property tax value. It's still a city that can count on growing revenues year after year. So the investment has not fled the city. But then you get to the question of, what are your priorities? How do you determine what goes high on the pecking order? I mean, I will just say that downtown development has been a big issue for many, many years in terms of administration after administration. So something like having a five-star hotel coming to downtown would fit in with that. At some point, maybe people say, well, we've done enough in downtown. But that point has not been reached, I don't think, in terms of the city's view on what's needed to really make it a viable downtown. And I will say, too, before I moved to Florida, I lived in Texas, and there was a city near the paper where I worked, Port Arthur, Texas, that at one point had a really viable, thriving downtown. And then I remember there was a hurricane that was approaching Port Arthur, and they had national news shows there, and they were there. As you can see, we're standing here in the middle of downtown Port Arthur, and all the shop owners are boarded up waiting the hurricane. Well, we knew that was that way every day of the year. There's something that's, if you have a downtown that's in decline, that hurts the whole city. It certainly hurts the neighborhoods around downtown. So, and can fuel that suburban flight of people moving farther and further away from downtown if they don't feel like there's a central core to a city. So those are some of the reasons. Now, is there any amount of cost justified? Obviously not. So that's the big question that comes up every time these deals come before council.
You know, on the cost of the Jaguars overall, when this project was rolled out recently, it was very much tied to this practice facility the Jaguars say they need to have in place before they can begin stadium renovations so that they can run some of their operations out of this facility and have office space for their employees. Is that practice facility not part of this particular analysis by DIA? Where does that stand, since that seemed to be sort of a centerpiece of their presentation a couple weeks back?
Sure. Well, it's not part of the Downtown Investment Authority analysis. And my understanding is the Downtown Investment Authority is not going to be the agency that reviews, vets, and recommends on that particular project. That's something that's going to be done through negotiations between the Mayor Curry's administration and the Jaguars, with the idea being that it would be a city-owned facility that's tied to the eventual renovation, expansion, improvement to another city-owned facility, which is the stadium. So I don't know, Ann, where that stands in terms of what the timing of it is. The Jaguars have said they want to do a 50-50 split, $120 million. They do $60 million. The city does $60 million. I think the big question there is going to be the city would build it, own it, and then they would lease it to the Jaguars. Well, how long is that lease going to be, and how ironclad is that lease going to be? Because the other big lease that's coming up is the city-owned stadium, which expires in 2030. You know, city council members are not going to go for, I don't think, spending a lot of money on this performance center with the practice fields if that investment is something that might be rendered moot in 2030 if the Jaguars are not going to be still in town. So it's kind of tied up in that. Is it going to be a long lease for this practice field facility, or a short lease? How does that work? How easy would it be for the Jaguars to get out of it? I think a lot of those questions will still be resolved.
You know, that whole process will be obviously a whole new undertaking for the city, trying to figure out, you know, how much to invest in this stadium. My producer Josh is telling me that in the 90s, the city spent up front $121 million to renovate that stadium, which would be about $200 million in 2020 money. So that's not an overall expense. Obviously, there's been some additional improvements. And one question I had for you, David, is I know that part of their return on investment analysis looks at bed tax dollars. That's money that is, you know, charged when people stay in a hotel room. One of the taxes that you kind of get hit with when you're checking out and you didn't realize in any city. But for this particular hotel, we're going to be seeing, I would imagine, particularly large sums of taxes based on the room rate of somewhere between $420 and $470 for a room.
Right.
But those bed tax dollars primarily go to, or I guess exclusively go to stadium maintenance. Is that correct?
It's kind of it's a mixed bag. So the way it works is there's like a 6-cent bed tax. I think 2 cents of that bed tax goes towards paying for the stadium. And this is, you know, going back to when it was built, all the debt that was taken by the city to pay for it. And then there's another 2 cents that can be used for the area around the sports complex and maintenance and everything. And then there's another 2 cents of that 6 cents kind of goes towards general promotion of tourism and getting groups and conventions to come here. So there is some link there in terms of as bed taxes rise, that means there's more money that could be available to do possibly help pay for a new stadium, or not a new stadium, but an improved stadium, a renovated stadium, which would cost several $100 million. And then there could be more money that the city could say, okay, let's use that to maintain, upgrade the stadium. And to the extent that a better stadium makes a more attractive product for the Jaguars, and then they can charge more money for people to buy tickets, that can be a beneficial thing to the Jaguars. Of course, they got to have good product on the field too, which they haven't had, and that'd probably be the biggest factor. But so yeah, there could be some connection there, Ann. You know, there's a lot of hotel rooms in Jacksonville that pay money into that bed tax fund. And even though the Four Seasons would be a very expensive room night, in the big scheme of things, it's not a huge change, I don't think, in what the collections otherwise are going to be from all these people going to hotels from one end of the county to the other.
But to be clear, the bed tax dollars that the city is counting as going into city coffers are primarily going to stadium and sports complex maintenance and improvements.
No, it would just be going to that general bed tax, the 6-cent bed tax.
Okay.
And then once it's collected, it would be split among the different types and uses that the city has. Now, there's also something in the proposed development agreement that, in addition to the regular 6-cent, people who stay at the Four Seasons Hotel would pay an additional 2 cents. So that's chump change if you're willing probably to spend that kind of money in the first place. But I think there would be like some special account set up for that money that would be used to kind of maintain the area in and around the Four Seasons Hotel.
Very good. Just really briefly, David, because we've got to pop off here, but this proposal is somewhat different than Lot J. What briefly strategy changes have they attempted this time?
Much more public outreach, much more public involvement. They're going to these town hall meetings all over the place. So that has been a definite change. The other change is probably site specific. There's a lot less money being asked for up front. With Lot J, you had a huge amount of work that had to be done just to get it ready for development. So it's a little more palatable for the city if they're not being asked to spend a lot of money up front and they actually spend their money after the project is actually built.
David, a pleasure talking to you as always. Thanks for catching us up on this project.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ann.
Later in the hour, our midweek roundup of what's good on the First Coast. But next, a look at how researchers are trying to tackle COVID variants. Welcome back. Vaccination rates continue to climb in the U.S., which is driving COVID cases and deaths down. That's good news. At the same time, researchers are studying other therapeutics to treat the disease as it mutates. New Amsterdam Science's Executive Vice President, Dr. Chris van de Wettering, spoke to Melissa Ross about continuing threats stemming from COVID and its evolving variants. He says these variants are a real problem despite a population that is now over 50% vaccinated. Take a listen.
Hi, Chris. Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa. Glad to be here.
I'm really interested to hear more about your research. We are not out of the woods yet when it comes to the pandemic. Herd immunity is going to be a hard target to achieve. So tell us a little bit about what you're looking at. Pharmaceutical options for vaccine-adverse people, as well as those who've already had the virus. Tell us what your research is showing.
Well, what we've seen so far is that there are, as you've seen, there's been a number of variants that have been popping up, and this is contributing to what I think is going to be a likelihood that this disease is going to be here to stay. Herd immunity, I think, works as long as you don't have a virus that mutates as much as, unfortunately, as COVID or flu does. And as soon as you have a new variant come out and it starts becoming more, resistant to existing vaccines, you make a new vaccine to combat that. However, my company, New Amsterdam Sciences, we're focused not on making vaccines, but generating therapeutics to treat those who have been infected, who may have not been vaccinated.
What kind of therapeutics?
So we're focused on developing anti-inflammatories. So one of the things that we've observed, what scientific and medical establishment have observed, is that those who have COVID, particularly those who develop a severe form of COVID, what sends them to the hospital and to the ventilator and to their ultimate demise is not necessarily the virus itself, but the body's immune response to the virus.
The cytokine storm that we've heard about. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So our therapeutic is working to combat that, to basically dial down the immune system to prevent people from progressing to that state.
Well, we heard in the beginning, in the beginning of the pandemic, we heard a lot about hydroxychloroquine doing that, but then people got off using that as a treatment. So there were safety concerns around it and concerns that might not be working all that well. So what kinds of therapeutics are you developing that are maybe different from that?
Okay, so hydroxychloroquine, my understanding, was originally an anti-parasitic agent. Some of the other existing therapeutics that are out there right now, I'm sure you've heard of remdesivir, which is an antiviral. So it actually, a small molecule drug that'll actually prevent the virus from replicating. And then you have baricitinib, which targets protein that's involved in triggering inflammation. And our compound, the way it works, it actually works upstream, where it prevents, I'm sure you've heard of free radicals, reactive oxygen species. What happens in that case in people what's been observed in COVID infections, at least from the scientific literature, is that infection can actually create a lot of damaging free radicals, which in turn triggers inflammation. And our compound actually will dial down the free radical formation, which in turn turns down the inflammation.
And when do you anticipate bringing something like this to market? What's the timetable?
Timetable, probably realistically, we're in discussions right now with the FDA in terms of preparing our compound in our packaging to set up a clinical trial. So realistically, to get the compound into people, we're thinking probably a horizon of 8 months or so.
That's not too far off. Now, these therapeutics, you think, could go beyond just treating this particular type of patient. Is that right? You're also looking at how you might help people with long-haul COVID?
That's a great question. Our thought right now is that if we offset the development of severe COVID, that will mitigate the development of long haul. What's interesting, there was a publication from a research group in Britain which looked at long haul, and what they've shown was about 10% of all people who've been infected with the COVID virus develop some sort of long haul symptom. Although the vast majority of people who develop long haul are those who've developed severe form of the disease, and that's not a surprise, right? Because their lungs get damaged, and when your body can't take much oxygen, that has downstream consequences on the rest of your tissue. So the community is still trying to wrap their heads around, I guess. What exactly is long haul? Right now, it appears to be a constellation of different types of symptoms. Some people have abnormal heartbeats. Some people have what you've heard in the media, brain fog, cognitive issues. And so, by treating that, we're not looking to treat that condition per se. We're just trying to offset that.
But overall, what you're saying is that you'd like the FDA to focus on therapeutics along with the incredible effort we've seen on vaccinations. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the vaccines have been a tremendous asset. I mean, there's no debating that. But I look at this from if you just kind of look at it from a security standpoint, you have a layered security. Your vaccines is sort of like your first line of defense, but some people will slip through, right? Some people will get sick. Vaccines don't prevent infection. They train your immune system to respond to an infection, but some infections can proceed to a bad, to more severe state, even if you've been vaccinated, and that's been shown with cases of breakthrough infections. And so having therapeutics on board to actually treat people when they're at a stage, when their immune system can't fight the virus, or when their immune system actually, goes into hyperdrive, that's critical.
It's fascinating to get this from you, and I know your company is looking into clinical trials when it comes to treatment of coronavirus. So we'll have to check back with you. He's Chris Van de Wettering, PhD, Executive Vice President of the biotech company New Amsterdam Sciences. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
Trace amounts of prescription drugs, including antidepressant medications, are now widely found in water bodies here in Florida and around the world. So what happens when marine creatures come in contact with them? Scientists at the University of Florida have been studying this question, focusing on crayfish, which are common in freshwater environments, including the lower St. Johns River. On the line now is A.J. Reisinger, the lead author of the study and an assistant professor in the Soil and Water Sciences Department at the university's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Good morning, A.J.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure having you. I appreciate you being on. So this study of yours is getting a lot of attention around the country. I've seen it in a number of publications. Give us the upshot, if you will, of what your research found.
Yeah, it seems like people are pretty interested in what happens when animals go on drugs. So what we found was that when you expose a freshwater crayfish to an environmentally realistic concentration of a specific antidepressant, that crayfish will change their behavior. They become more bold and more likely to go searching for food resources and less likely to be searching for other crayfish. And we also found that crayfish overall can have effects on aquatic ecosystems more broadly, things like nutrient cycling and algal biomass. But we didn't find that the pharmaceuticals changed the effects of the crayfish on the broader ecosystem. So that's the 30-second summary.
Talk, if you will, a little bit about the presence of pharmaceuticals in water bodies. First of all, how they get there, and is this a new phenomenon?
Yeah, so there's a wide range of different pathways by which pharmaceuticals or other synthetic chemicals can get into freshwater or marine ecosystems. For pharmaceuticals in particular, the main pathway is through our wastewater systems. Whenever any person takes a medication, your body doesn't metabolize all of the medications that you ingest. Some people might be really efficient at using whatever medication. Some people might be less efficient. But no matter who you are, some portion of the drug that you ingest will actually be excreted out and flushed down the toilet when you go to the bathroom. So once those trace amounts of pharmaceuticals get into the wastewater system, they could go into a septic field, which is not designed to remove pharmaceuticals and might leak into groundwater. They could get to a wastewater treatment plant, which wastewater treatment plants are good at removing certain compounds, but not as good at removing other ones. Or there could be leaky pipes that might release the sewage directly into the environment. So that's in a perfect world. We ingest our medications and a small amount goes down the drain. In an imperfect world, but a more realistic world, a certain amount of people decide that they don't need to take all the medications that they're prescribed. They start feeling better, and so they have these leftover unwanted medications. And the easiest way to get rid of them is to flush them down the drain. So instead of releasing maybe 5 or 10% of your medication that you ingest into your body, now you're releasing 100% of that drug, and it's still going through our wastewater system. So that's how those compounds can get into the environment. And I do not think it's not a new issue, but it's kind of becoming an increasingly important issue that we understand more about. And it's because we now have the analytical capabilities to actually detect really low concentrations in our water. So we've been able to detect pharmaceuticals in the environment since the 90s, but basically as soon as we started prescribing drugs to people, some portion of those drugs were going to make their way into fresh waters. We just couldn't detect them at the low concentrations that they're currently present.
So the detection capability has increased, but I would also guess so has just the amount of drugs that people are taking nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exact numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that the pharmaceutical industry is big business, and I know that a lot of people take a lot of different medications, specifically for antidepressants. And from 2015 to 2018, the CDC did a survey and found that 1 in 8 people in the United States took a pharmaceutical or took an antidepressant regularly. So it's a pretty prevalent proportion. It's a large proportion of our population that are taking these medications.
So what is the significance of seeing altered behavior in a kind of creature like the crayfish? I mean, what does that tell us about how, implications? What is the concern?
Yeah. So we specifically looked at crayfish because we know that crayfish are a really major component of a wide range of freshwater ecosystems. They can be present in really high numbers, and they can also have large effects on aquatic food webs. Crayfish will basically eat anything they can get their claws on. They're omnivorous, so they'll eat algae, they'll eat plants, they'll eat bugs, they'll eat baby fish. And so because they eat everything, they are really critical components of aquatic ecosystems. But they also are prey for a lot of different larger organisms as well. So fish will eat crayfish, wading birds, aquatic or semi-aquatic mammals like otters or raccoons will also eat crayfish. And so our study found that the behavior of the crayfish became bolder when they're exposed to these antidepressants. So that makes them more likely to venture out into the environment instead of hiding in a refuge. And when they venture out into the environment, they're more likely to be predated upon and consumed just because they're moving around more. And so that means that their other effects on whatever they're eating are going to be reduced. And so that can have untold consequences on larger ecosystem processes.
And tell us about, what is your plan for additional study on this? Is additional study needed? What would you like to learn?
I think that, we don't have any immediate research ongoing looking at antidepressants in my group. We have done some work on other pharmaceuticals lately, like we published a paper last year on antibiotics and how they affected biofilm processes. We do have ongoing work that looks at how variation in crayfish behavior affects stream ecosystems and how that might be responding to climate change. So that's one thing, but it's not directly related to pharmaceuticals. I think that from the pharmaceutical line of inquiry, what we really need to do a better job of understanding is how individual compounds interact with each other, because it's really unlikely that there's ever going to be a circumstance in the real world where there's just one antidepressant in the water. It's much more likely that there will be a wide range of pharmaceuticals as well as nutrients and salts and heavy metals and PFAS and who knows what other contaminants. There's a wide range of chemical cocktails that are out there in the environment And so understanding how these different contaminants interact to have broader impacts on these organisms and water quality in general is something that really needs to be done. But it's really difficult to isolate those mixtures in the environment. So that's why it's much easier to focus on an individual compound to look at these mechanistic questions.
And it's my understanding that this study that you did used, when you say realistic, I mean water detection levels of these antidepressants that are already in our water bodies.
Yeah, so the study was performed in a laboratory in an artificial stream facility. So we make the streams as realistic as possible. So we bring in rocks and we bring in sand and we bring in leaves and bugs and all sorts of things from a nearby stream. But we also have a lot of control over the chemistry because we just use groundwater as our initial source of water, and then we can add whatever else we want to. And so we added a concentration of this antidepressant that is similar to what has been found in previous studies. So the concentration that we used was 0.5 parts per billion. So that's a very low level, but we can detect it. We can detect well below that, actually. And that concentration is slightly higher than the average of like 110 studies that were reviewed recently, but it's still well within the range. So we were at 0.5 parts per billion, but studies from the field with environmental concentrations have shown numbers that are 10, 20, 50 parts per billion. So we're much lower than the worst sites out in the world.
Well, AJ, I know that your recommendation for avoiding this problem includes, throwing away your prescription drugs rather than flushing them, putting them with some sort of non-edible material like coffee grounds, or turning them into a place where you can have them disposed of legally. AJ, I appreciate your time so much this morning, and your study is fascinating. So thanks for sharing with us and helping to explain it. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for him. We'll be right back.
WJCT proudly presents Cosmic American Music singer-songwriter Emmylou Harris live at the St. Augustine Amphitheater on March 4th, 2022. Tickets for Emmylou Harris live at the AMP available this Friday at 10 a.m. For more info, visit theamp.com. Announcing Vickers Landing at Oak Bridge, bridging retirees with an all-new Ponte Vedra Beach community featuring new homes, a resort lifestyle, and a life plan for every stage of aging. Information at vickerslanding.com.
I'm Peter O'Dowd. The American Camp Association says a record number of new campers are heading to camp this summer. And this year, along with archery, canoeing, and crafts, protocols for COVID testing, masks, vaccines, and quarantines. That's next time.
Today at 2 on WJCT News 89.9.
Camp is very entertaining.
On the next Fresh Air, our interview with soccer star and LGBTQ activist Megan Rapinoe. She's one of several women's soccer players featured in a new HBO Max documentary about the women's national team's ongoing fight for equal pay. She'll talk about that fight and about her life and soccer career.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Cities across the country are taking steps to limit the role of police at Pride events. Some transgender, Black, and Latino members of the community say they don't feel safe in the presence of law enforcement. But those representing LGBTQ police say the bans are shameful. In New York, the city's mayor called the move a mistake. Pride at a Crossroads, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Now, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health, a growing number of people reported distress in the past year, including new or worsening symptoms of depression, anxiety, and insomnia. Mental health and employee well-being are among the top concerns right now after more than a year of this devastating global pandemic. Author and life coach Karen Nutter offers hope and calm in these tense times. Melissa Ross spoke with her about her new book, Finding Contentment in a Chaotic World.
Karen, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa.
And this is something we are all seeking, contentment in a chaotic world. So your book is a godsend. Obviously, you know from your work as a coach and a certified emotional intelligence analyst, which is very cool, that people are struggling out there. So what's your message for people that are really seeking some Zen after everything we've been through?
My complete message is life is chaotic and yours doesn't have to be. You know, the pandemic hit and everybody was a little stressed even before that. I mean, life can be overwhelming. And yet the pandemic made it a little more so, with kids being in the home environment, trying to navigate that, work somehow becoming remote when it maybe wasn't before, navigating Zoom, learning Zoom. Mm-hmm. All these things have created a lot of chaos for people.
Absolutely. And so what you're so good at is helping us with strategies to create a more positive, a more peaceful life, a more productive life, both at work and at home. In your book, you have some tips and strategies for people. Can you share a few of them with us?
Absolutely. The tips are, first of all, the book is very short, easy read, and the tips are, start out by finding where your discontentment comes from. I use tips in there such as journaling, which is free. It's free to everyone. It doesn't cost anything. It only takes a minute or two. And meditation, prayer. All of these tips are utilized and talked about in my book. I even have free downloadable avenues for journaling. For example, people say to me all the time, what do I journal about? So professionally, I created this tip sheet of topics to journal on. And you can journal for 30 seconds, you can journal for a minute, you can journal for 30 minutes. And it gets that hogwash out of your head and onto paper, which probably cuts the strength of it down by 50% or more.
It really does work. And guided meditation, too, you recommend. For people who aren't familiar with it, you kind of ease them into it.
I do. And meditation is something I started doing in 2003, and I couldn't sit still for 5 seconds, much less 5 minutes. But I have created a meditation video for folks who maybe aren't sure they like meditation, aren't sure what to do. It guides them through. It's my voice, and it's calming, and it creates inner peace. And it can be found on my website, cbkadvising.com, coaching downloadables, and it's complimentary. So
check it out, everybody, and pick up Karen's book, Finding Contentment in a Chaotic World. Author and coach Karen Nutter. Karen, thanks.
And now a quick look at what's good this Wednesday. Don't throw away your shot. Episcopal Children's Services is bringing mobile COVID-19 vaccination vans to North and Central Florida beginning this Friday, June 18th. In partnership with CDR Health, the Florida Division of Emergency Management, and the Florida Department of Health, ECS is helping to fill a void left by the closing of other vaccination sites. These sites will open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and will administer Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson vaccines for free. For more information, including the specific locations, you can visit ecs4kids.org. Now, if you want to feel good while doing good, you're in luck, because Jacksonville's Yoga for Justice and Inclusion is hosting an event this Saturday, June 26, in James Weldon Johnson Park from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. It will feature a yoga class from 9:30 to 10:45, as well as opportunities to register to vote, get a massage, and listen to live music, among other things. The requested donation is $20, with all proceeds going to the EVAC movement. This event is sponsored by Bold Bean Coffee Roasters, Southern Roots, and Cultivate. You can reserve your spot on Eventbrite or go to jyji.org/events. And 121 Financial is partnering with this the Sulzbacher Center to host a back-to-school supply drive to support children and families that Sulzbacher serves, as well as underprivileged children, who live in the community around the Sulzbacher Village campus. Between today and July 29th, you can donate complete back-to-school backpack packages or individual supply items at any 121 Financial Branch location to help families experiencing homelessness and poverty in Jacksonville as they prepare for the 21-22 school year. In total, Sulzbacher Project supporting between 300 and 400 children with necessary school supplies. For more information, you can go to 121fcu.org. What's more, good news delivered right into your inbox. Subscribe to our What's Good Wednesdays newsletter at wjct.org. And that's our program. We thanks to all of our guests and callers today. Our producer is Heather Schatz. Josh Torres is our director. Our editorial director is Jessica Palumbo, and Bill Bortsfield is our digital editor. Have questions or comments for First Coast Connect? Send us an email at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I'm Ann Schindler, sitting in for Melissa Ross. I'll be back doing the same thing tomorrow. You're listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. If you...
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TP